Welcome to the Plant-Centered and Thriving podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Kitchens. Welcome to the show, Plant-Centered listeners. My name is Ashley, and today, I'm telling you, I don't know if it's the new year or what it is, but I feel like I'm on fire for intuitive eating, basically. And that's a big part of what we talk about today. So if you're wanting to stop using the scale as a form of measurement or as a way to measure your success, or you're wanting to make peace with food, or you're not wanting to get weighed at the doctor's office, Adrien and I talk about this on today's show. And as a plant-based dietitian and as a dietitian in general, I learned very little, first of all, about plant-based eating in school. This was, of course, over 10 years now, and things I'm sure have changed. And I definitely did not learn really anything about intuitive eating. I'm telling you, like zero. And it was a few years into my practice as a dietitian that I read the book Intuitive Eating, and it completely changed the way I viewed food, nutrition, even myself, my practice. And even though I'm incredibly passionate about plant-based eating, I'm also really passionate about this intuitive eating piece. And I was thrilled to have Adrien on the show today. So Adrien has more than 20 years of experience working in the dietetic field with a focus on eating disorders, neurochemistry, nutrition, and business development. And when we talked about having her on the show, I was like, well, can we talk about BMI and anti-diet culture related stuff? And she was like, she was like, didn't even bat an eye. She's like, I cannot wait. So this conversation, I just feel like more and more people need to hear it. I think to me, it's invaluable. And hopefully you feel the same way. But Adrien, in 2007, she founded and opened her first private practice in Austin, Texas, called iLiveWell Nutrition. She combines evidence-based nutrition science with a compassionate approach to counseling patients to deliver health outcomes and improve patients' day-to-day lives. She has personally counseled with hundreds of patients, ranging from severe eating disorder cases to people with diabetes to high-performance athletes. And it was a few years ago that iLiveWell Nutrition became Nourish, a nationwide virtual first nutrition group focused on addressing America's healthcare crisis through greater access to nutrition care. And we talk about this towards the end about how if you're wanting to work with a dietitian in 2023, how you can go about doing that, how to see if your insurance covers it. She just offers a lot of great inside tips to someone who's been practicing for over 20 years. And Adrien now serves as the Chief Clinical Officer of Nourish. And what started out as just an idea now serves thousands of patients, nearly all of whom use the service via telehealth and are completely covered by their health insurance, which how incredible is that? We talk about how we definitely wish more people had access to dietitians, kind of like when you go to, well, I don't want to give any spoilers. I'm going to back up. I don't want to talk about anything, but if you align with wanting to make peace with food, if you align with wanting to stop dieting in 2023, or maybe this intuitive eating journey is new for you, or maybe it's been an ongoing involvement in intuitive eating, whatever the case is, I really think that you're going to find value in what Adrien has to say about breaking free from diet culture itself and the weight that it has on a lot of us in this world. So please join me in welcoming the lovely Adrien to the show. Welcome to the show, Adrien.
I am so excited to be here, Ashley. This is going to be so much fun.
I'm so excited to have you. I cannot wait to get into all these things that we have planned for today's episode. But before we do that, would you mind just giving us a little background on who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I'm a mom, a wife, and a registered dietitian, and I'm the chief clinical officer for Nourish. We are an online telenutrition platform, and our mission is to create better access to weight inclusive care and to make it affordable to everybody.
Mm. And that weight inclusive care, I would imagine that I know things are changing in the healthcare
Yeah.
system,
Mhm.
but it sounds like you're kind of ahead of the curve there because I know that that's something that is needed.
I hope so. I hope we're ahead of the curve, or at least like laying the groundwork for like
Mm,
everybody like come this way. I promise it's so much better.
yeah, yeah. And I know that you're really passionate about those things, weight inclusion, access to dietitians from all across the nation. So what kind of like piqued that interest and, just providing more access to people who really do need or want to have a dietitian?
Yeah. So I started the company, my private practice about 16 years ago, and I couldn't afford to see me. And so I was like, well, that doesn't seem right. If I was charging so much out of pocket. And so I was like, well, I have insurance. I would want to use that. So let me figure
Mm,
this out. Let me figure out how I'm going to be an insurance provider. And I did started that 15 years ago. And I was like, well, this makes sense. And how do I make it just easy for dietitians? Because dietitians are really good at being dietitians. They love to talk, they love to help. And so I was like, okay, I know how to do this. So I want to make it easy for other dietitians. And so that's kind of where starting a group practice and then partnering with a technology company just kind of kept snowballing.
yeah, yeah. And it sounds like it's not stopping anytime soon either, which is
I hope
wonderful.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope not.
Yeah. Well, so because you mentioned that piece of the insurance as well, is there something that you would recommend for maybe someone listening who doesn't know if their insurance covers nutrition visits? Like, is there kind of a recommendation that you would give just to find out what is covered?
That's such a tricky, complex question because you might go to your insurance and like, oh yeah, I see that there's registered dietitians and it's covered. And then you have to dig a little bit deeper. So what is actually covered? So you might have preventative benefits. You might have, which means you don't have a disease yet.
Mm,
You might only have certain diseases that are covered, like diabetes or renal disease, or you might have like a limit to number of visits. So just because your insurance plan covers, think registered dietitian, it doesn't always mean that it's covered for what you're wanting help with. So just like general help usually isn't always covered. And I'll put a little asterisk there. The other thing to think about is you are like, I'm just going to use a commercial plan. Like if you are on Blue Cross Blue Shield, there is probably a gazoodle different Blue Cross Blue Shield's different plans. So it's not just saying that, oh, this dietitian accepts Blue Cross. Does that dietitian accept Blue Cross on your plan? So it takes a little bit of due diligence and then also working with that provider to double check on their end as well.
yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And I
Yeah.
definitely want to talk about that a little bit more towards the end because I just think that's
Yeah.
important for people to know if they can't pay out of pocket, they don't want to pay out of pocket, kind of what their options are in working
Hmm.
with a dietitian. So
Yeah.
great. Okay. Well, I want to switch gears because I know how you feel about diet culture.
Oh,
And I feel like this is something, especially in the new year in 2023, that I, I've seen a shift in myself, just in how I view nutrition, how I view our healthcare system, how I view diet culture. And I feel like more people the veil is kind of being peeled back and
mm,
what they're seeing some true colors there. So I kind of want you to touch on diet culture. And if you could just maybe explain some of the dangers of diet
yeah.
culture.
It was so funny you had asked me like, oh, can you explain diet culture? And it took me a second to be like, well, how do you define diet culture? Because it's just like, oh, well, it's just the way we live.
Yeah.
It's kind of ubiquitous in our society. And this idea of, well, if you want to control, it's a how you control your body so that you are air quotes normal. And so it was so interesting. I was really like having a hard time, like, how do you define diet culture? And I know there's definitions out there, but it was just really interesting. It's this pervasive idea or belief that your body shape is more important than your physical, psychological well-being, which is kind of really weird and jacked up when you think about it deep
Yes.
down.
Yeah. It is very jacked up. You're so right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think kind of the dangers, holy bananas, like it's just insane because we start to really pull ourselves apart and start to focus on this exterior self. And diet culture has us normalizing good, bad, right, wrong food. And the harm of that, and mental health providers know this all too well, is this is where we can start to see people labeling themselves as good, bad, right, wrong.
Yeah.
And so if you have labeled I don't know, a certain food, marshmallows is a bad food, and you accidentally eat marshmallows because you fell off the wagon of this silly diet, then you now are a bad human because you ate a marshmallow. That's
Yeah.
bananas. And what this can lead to, and we see it skyrocketing, is disordered eating and eating disorders.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we're so focused on maybe like our outward appearance or a number on the scale or a pant size
Yeah.
that we kind of lose sight of all these other things that really we need to nourish, like our mental and emotional health, like our physical health.
Yes. Oh, it's so interesting. Like, this could be a whole other podcast. Is like your mental health actually starts with nutrition. So all of our brain
Mm,
chemistry, our serotonin, our dopamine, things that make us happy, excited, fall in love, oxytocin, start with nutrition. And nobody ever talks about that. Is
yeah.
like, how are we really taking care of ourselves from a mental health side, and like allowing us to eat an abundance of food. And also, food is awesome and enjoyable and shouldn't be good, bad, right, wrong. And if you love marshmallows, rock star, enjoy marshmallows. Like, they're funny, they're cute. Yeah.
Yep, they are. And right now when it's like cold outside, they're great with a little hot chocolate. It's like perfect.
Oh, yes,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah. So how can people maybe work through, and this is again, this could be a whole nother podcast, but like, we've all grown up in diet culture and some of us have definitely grown up in more extreme versions of diet culture than others. But what are maybe some tips that you give people to kind of start working through, maybe relinquishing some of those beliefs that they've learned over the years from diet culture?
Oh, it's like breaking up with a bad boyfriend. Oh my goodness. It's hard. And I think
Yeah.
that's the first thing, is like, know that this is hard, and know that it's going to feel like you're going against everything you see in social media and media, and it's going to feel like you're doing something wrong.
Mm,
And so I think just noticing that it's going to feel really weird, and people, and possibly in your circle, like when you were going, if somebody was starting to go plant-based, having that community is really important too.
yeah.
So I think kind of that whole journey, if you've started going plant-based and if you're trying to break up with diet culture, it has that same kind of path of like, it's going to feel lonely in the beginning until you find your people. And so I think that's really important. My biggest thing is like, the more that you can make peace with food, which
Mm,
sounds so easy, just
hmm.
make peace with food. That is a process. And I strongly encourage you to reach out for help and support, finding a weight inclusive dietitian, finding a mental health provider, cleaning up your social media, all of those things. And I actually have like a little freebie for your people, and how, like, some steps on how to like break up with diet culture.
Oh, absolutely. We'll put that in the
Yeah.
show notes below. Yeah, that'd be
Awesome.
great.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I love all of those things, and I think that's so important to remember, and even comparing it, like you said, to plant-based eating, that you feel like you're doing something wrong, or maybe people are judging you because you're going against the norm, but you in your heart, you feel that this is right for you, and that is the same thing when it comes to breaking up with diet culture, and like you said, trying to make peace with food is recognizing that this isn't an overnight thing. There's a lot of, especially I know when I went plant-based, there was a lot of unlearning. And even when I started intuitive eating, there was a lot of like, wow, this is very different than how I grew up or how society views food. And you almost feel like, "Well, am I doing something wrong here? Even though it
Yes.
feels right." Yeah.
Yes. And you kind of like look around, and like, if you don't have somebody else to talk to about you, it's
Yeah.
easy to fall back into those cycles of like, oh, well, it didn't work, or oh, I'm
Yep.
a failure. Oh, look at this other diet that I've tried. And like,
Yeah.
and so it feels like it's a diet cycle again. And so that's why finding other people to talk to, professionals, so that you can talk it out and help your brain to rewire and reprogram those or unlearn those messaging.
Yep, absolutely. Well, you had mentioned make peace with food. Can you kind of just explain for our listener what that means, kind of just generally?
Yeah, and it's going to be different for everybody. And so I think that's the other thing. And so what peace for one person is with food is different than the other. So it's very personal. So if you've had a weird relation, I'm just going to use marshmallows this whole time because
Sure.
I just so if you've had this intense relationship with marshmallows, and that if every time you have marshmallows in your house, we just eat all of them, and then the next day is awful and you beat yourself up and you decide, okay, I'm never eating marshmallows again, and then it happens again. And so you have now deemed marshmallows are bad. And so the journey that you're beginning with this said food of marshmallows is to make peace with it, of like, it's just a marshmallow. It
Mm,
is no better or worse than a popsicle. It's
yeah.
no better or worse than something else. It's just a marshmallow. And so it has kind of taken marshmallows off this pedestal of being good, bad, right, wrong, and it's just been part of our repertoire of what we eat.
Yeah.
Some days we like them, and the interesting things that I've done this with patients is when they've had this food on a pedestal and it's kind of controlled them and their thoughts and their emotions for so long, and we've added it back in, they're like, you know what, I really don't prefer marshmallows anymore. Like, I thought I loved them and I don't really like them. Like, cool, okay. And like, well, is that okay? I'm like, yeah, it's up to you. It's your choice.
Yeah. So they basically come off this pedestal. And now that you can have them whenever you want, it's like, well, they're not really that big of a deal. I mean, maybe they're not as desirable anymore.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally, totally.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
saw something on Reels this morning. It was talking about basically like it's going to a restaurant and having the option to choose like pizza or salad. And she was explaining it's not like one is better than the other. The power lies in you kind of being able to look and be like, okay, what is it that I actually really want today at this meal? And being able to decide between either or get both for that matter, but
Yeah.
not feeling like, oh, well, I have to choose a salad because it's quote deemed healthier by society.
Yeah. And it's so I love that you brought up that point, because I know so many patients that have had that like same dilemma of like, I really want pizza, but I should get, they just should all over that food. And then they
Yes.
have that like peace of mind where like, well, I can get whatever I want. Well, like, you know what, I don't want either. I actually just want cheesy bread for dinner. Like, cool.
Yeah.
And and then you actually get to have a better relationship with yourself of like, what do I actually want,
Yep.
as opposed to following these arbitrary diet culture rules.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. The power lies from within and your choices. Absolutely.
It's
Yep.
kind of mind blowing when you kind of watch people go through it. They're like, is this real life?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Especially after so many years of feeling like all your food choices are being controlled by other people or
Yeah.
society. It's very
Yeah.
freeing.
Yeah. And little asterisk,
Yeah.
we're talking about the end stage. Like, going through this process is upside down backwards. It's not linear, like two steps forward, three steps back, then
Yep.
we'll move sideways. So we're talking about the end states. I don't want it to be sunshine and butterflies. Like, it takes a while to get there. And so like just a
Mm-hmm.
reality check too.
Yes, that's a really good point because that's true. I mean, I've worked with some clients, a year plus, and we're still working through some of these things. It takes
Yeah.
time, and then sometimes you work on one thing and it goes smoothly, but then that kind of opens the door to like this other issue that it's like, oh, okay, we need to work on that now. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's an evolving
Yeah.
process for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, since we're kind of on the diet culture train, I would love to talk about BMI a little bit because I imagine you and I both feel pretty similarly to the BMI
Oh,
scale.
yes. Oh, bless its heart.
Yes.
The Southern Texan in me is like, oh, bless
Yeah.
his heart.
Oh,
I
yes.
mean, I mean, when you start to really dig into BMI, which if you guys don't know, BMI is body mass index. You might have heard this when going to the doctor. It's used a lot in the medical community and in the federal government for tracking trends of obesity. And so it was actually invented in 1830 by a Belgian statistician, sociologist, astronomer, mathematician.
So not even a
Uh,
doctor.
oh no, I mean, he had some PhDs,
Sure.
but not
Yeah.
a medical, yeah. And I will get his name wrong. It's Lambert Aldolphi, well, Quetelet, and it was called the Quetelet Index, I think. So this is back in 1830. So fast forward until 1972, Ansel Keys, who we hear a lot in nutrition land of like research, who is a sociologist, not a MD, coined the phrase body mass index to do lots of sociological research on bodies and fat tissue in the body and all of that. So almost 2 centuries after its in a conception, doctors and insurance companies are still using this as a first line of assessment for health, which leads
Wow.
to higher insurance premiums.
Yep.
And it's comparing the average white man to standards from 1830, which is
Adrian,
just bananas.
I know my mind is blown. I'm like, are you kidding me?
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Yes. And so the BMI scale, I mean, it's used everywhere in the healthcare system.
Yeah.
And I know that people are becoming more on board with maybe it's not the best form of measurement. And then there's people like you and I who would love to just see it go out the window, never come back.
Yep.
Um, but what so we use BMI as an indicator for health, basically. That is historically kind of how it's been used for. And it sounds like obviously it's used for insurance and a bunch of different things. But why is the BMI scale or even just like weight in general not a true indicator, maybe the number one indicator of health?
I think for the BMI, why it's so bad is it doesn't take into consideration your race,
Mm,
your identified gender, your body size, your lifestyle, your medical history, your genetics. Like it is just a mathematical equation. Like it's just like that has nothing to do. Like I didn't even get to type in anything. It's
mm,
absolutely absurd.
yeah.
And like weight as an indicator of health is also, I mean, it's just your gravitational pull on this earth. That is it. It has nothing to do with like medical status. So when somebody's like, oh, cool, you lost weight, but you still have like anxiety, like it's
Mm,
absolutely silly. Or like, oh, cool, you have lost weight or your BMI is down, but you just got diagnosed with cancer. Like it has nothing,
yeah.
like, there's no kind of like indicator of like your health status. And I know there's going to be a lot of yeah buts out there because there is a ton of research that shows that the BMI is like showing indicators of other, like leading to heart disease and diabetes and all of that. And my biggest push to the medical community is do better research. Like, let's
Mm,
do better. Like, hey, everybody in the medical community, me included, like, let's do better. Let's do
yeah.
some better research that encompasses the whole person, taking in consideration their race, their sexual orientation, their lived experience, their medical conditions, and do better.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think so many people who walk into the doctor's office, it's almost like they're carrying this own weight of like, one, they have to get weighed. And then two, they see their BMI, whether it's gone up or down, and their doctor's kind of talking to them about it. And if it's gone up, especially, I know, and I don't want to demonize doctors by any means, but people can be maybe a little harsh that, okay, well, your BMI is going up or your weight's going up. We need to fix that, and kind of not looking at the whole picture of what actually is going on with this person in general.
Oh, there's so many. I can't even tell you how many times I've talked with patients and like the
Yeah.
session that we have right before going to their doctors, we have to like talk them down off the ledge of like, okay, this is what's going to happen. How are we going to go about it? How can you advocate for yourself of like, maybe we don't get weighed? How can we
Hmm.
maybe step on the scale backwards? How can we do all those things? It is traumatic because
Yeah.
there's so much harm that can go on when you get blamed and shamed for your body.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. So what do you recommend for someone who maybe doesn't want to see their weight or step on the scale when they go to the doctor's office? Because we all go at some point.
Yeah.
You kind of mentioned it, but what are some things that you tell your patients
Yeah.
so they can advocate for themselves that they don't want to see their weight?
Just say no, like with drugs.
Yeah. There you go.
Just say no. Like unless there's certain medications, there are medications that do need to be have weight on them for digestion reasons. But other than that, like cool, like you don't need to. And if your primary care physician is really advocating, like I need your weight, cool, step on the scale backwards and just like
Mm,
I don't need to know for my mental health, and just advocate for yourself. Again, it will feel weird. You will feel like an outlier. You will
yeah.
feel absolutely like you're doing something wrong, and it's okay. You're gonna get funny looks. You're gonna get questions, and I got your back. Like
Yes.
Ashley and I are here,
We
like
do.
saying, yeah, like we got your back. Like you can do this. It'll be
Yeah.
weird, but you do it for yourself. And the
Yeah.
more that we can all start doing it, it'll become the norm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know I've seen people on social media who are very transparent. I mean, some people who even will have their phone on while they go into the doctor's office and they'll communicate with the nurse, who is ever weighing them. Hey, maybe have a history of disordered eating or eating disorder, or I just don't want to see my weight in general. And they'll kind of go through that process. And I think it's really empowering for people to see that, hey, I can do this too. There are other people out
Yes.
there doing it.
Yeah. And we have these little, they're like little credit cards for patients that just aren't ready to vocalize it, that they'll hand to their provider, just like, and it says, please do not weigh me. I am working on my recovery from an eating disorder. And so if they're not
Yeah,
ready to be vocal, we actually have these little cards for patients.
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Can anyone get those, or is it just for patients?
You know, I can figure that out. But if you have,
Yeah, maybe
if you're, yeah, if your
yeah.
listeners would like them, we would love to be able to provide that because, more the merrier.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I could not
Yeah.
agree more. Yep. And I think that
Mhm.
was a good point too, Adrian, in what you said of like, especially even with going plant-based or trying to make peace with food or whatever that is, even saying something like, I don't want to be weighed, it is going to feel weird at first, but the more that you do it, and even going in prepared, like meal planning for plant-based eating, the more that you can go in prepared, the better off you're going to be in following through with it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And don't beat yourself up if it doesn't work the first time. Like if you
Yes.
chicken out, you're like, okay, I can't do it. Cool beans. Like you'll get there.
Yep.
It may just not be the day and it'll happen when it needs to happen.
Yes, yeah. That actually reminds me of a quick story when I was in Paris and I was like adamant. I'm like, I'm gonna order this burger in French. And I was like so gung-ho and I get up to the counter and I like forgot everything that I was going to say. And so I ended up speaking in English and they were like, here's the English menu. And I was like, oh man, but I was like, I was better prepared for the next time. So
Nice.
yep. Yeah.
Yeah. We always have like those stories played out in our head and like in real life, you're like, oh, I can't do
Yep. Yep. Yeah, it's true.
it.
Okay, so if someone maybe is not using the scale or they don't want to be weighed, what are maybe some ways that they can measure success that don't involve weight or their gravitational pull, which I love that reference.
I love this because I think it is just the way we all need to kind of be rewiring our brains or shifting our focus. This is up to you. What do you want to change?
Yeah.
Like, why are you going on this journey? And so, are we wanting more energy? Cool, let's measure that. Like, and again, how do you define energy? Is it popping out of bed? Is it being able to play with your little humans? Like, what is more energy actually defined as? If it is defined as being healthy, cool beans. What does healthy mean to you? Because my definition of health is going to be very different than yours versus the World Health Organization, which is interesting. Their definition of health is free of disease. That is physical and mental disease, which I thought was really
Wow.
interesting.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a cool way of looking at it. So this can be a really, again, odd shift. And so I'm going to keep advocating working with a registered dietitian or a mental health provider to come up with this because they're able to help other ways of maybe it's going more plant-based. Maybe it's going, I would love to cook more at home. Maybe it's, I would love to eat with other people or who knows what, eat more marshmallows. I don't know. But whatever this, your reasoning for going on this journey, set a new way of looking at it.
Instead of just using the number on the scale. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Do you recommend, this is more of like a pointed question, I guess, do you recommend people getting rid of their scale at home or what?
Gosh, yes. Like I
Yeah.
don't know. Yeah, like, why would you have one? I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really do wonder where that came from. I mean, my parents still have scales in their bathroom, and every time I go home, I want to throw it away every single time. And I always have a conversation with them about it. But I'm like, where did this come from? Why did we have scales in our home?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not
It's
asking
so
you to answer
weird.
that, but yeah, it is. It's just so weird.
Yeah. The only time I've ever wished for a scale is when I'm traveling. I'm like, crap, is my bag overweight?
Yes,
That
exactly.
is the only time I've ever thought like, oh, I could see where this is actually handy. But now
Yep.
they have them at the airport before you can like
Oh,
go.
nice. Yep. Perfect.
But other than that, I'm like, I don't see the purpose. Like I have no
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree. Yeah. Oh, I guess another question I was going to ask Adrian is why can't we just look at someone? And I remember this from childhood growing up, it's like you kind of look at one person and say, oh, they must be really healthy. You look at somebody else and they must not be very healthy. Why is that not an indicator of health when you can just look at someone and look at their body? Why is that not an indicator of health? And we kind of touched on it a little bit, but I'm just curious if you have a response to that.
Yeah. So when you say like look at them like, oh, they're healthy because of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, they're healthy because they fit this kind of mold that society deems as, quote, healthy.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Because that's the idea of this mold of healthy is steeped in diet culture.
Yeah.
And so it's a certain body shape, it's a certain build, it's a certain look that does not include race, sexual orientation, all of that. And so it's actually interesting. Now there are physical markers for malnutrition.
Mm.
And what is really interesting, a lot of those physical markers actually are like desirable in diet culture.
Yeah.
So it's really, again, jacked up. And so it's just, yeah, you can't look at somebody and say, like, oh, that person is healthier and that person needs more iron or that person needs more molybdenum or whatever. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
can't do that because you don't know their genetics, what's going on with them, nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point too. You never know what's going on behind closed doors or in someone like with someone's body. Like you never know. And so making that judgment is just completely inappropriate.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Okay. Are there any resources that you recommend for people who are trying to break free from diet culture? Like any favorite books or podcasts or anything that you often recommend?
Yeah, I would say one of my favorite podcasts out there that somebody is kind of starting to jump into this is Food Psych with Christy Harris. And she also has a book, I think it is The Anti-Diet, and it's a really easy read. Her podcast is great. I recommend it to many patients. It's really interesting. I've told the story so many times that I've was talking to patients so many times about, the beginning of intuitive eating, da 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 da. And like months we've been on this story and they're just like, oh, not for me, not for me. And they go and listen to Christy Harris's podcast and like, oh my gosh, do you know how amazing intuitive eating is? I was like total defeat, but like so excited. I was like,
Yes.
yes, like I'm so glad like you listened to this person as opposed to me, but I'll take it. I'll take any win I can get. So really love her show. There's so many books. If you just start to go and look for anti-diet or weight inclusive or health at every size, there's so many books. If you're a book person or podcast person, another one of my favorite podcasts is Maintenance Phase. Um,
Yes. That's a good one.
the one on BMI is pretty awesome.
It's very awesome.
Yeah, they go even more in depth, and it's very well researched and fact checked, and very sciencey, but in a very easy to digest form. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, they do a great job and they throw like some comedy in there and their chemistry itself is just so great. So you just want to
yeah,
keep listening. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. And you're right. They touch on some controversial topics, which is really great. I mean, it's refreshing to hear like when they went through BMI and like you said, it was extensively researched and I don't know, they just bring such a unique perspective as well. And I think it's a message that all of us need to hear. So
yep,
yeah, they do some great stuff.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for those. There are so many great books out there. And if that's kind of one of your focuses in 2023 to try and break free from diet culture, make peace with food, maybe not use the scale every day or at all eventually, hopefully.
Mhm. Yep, yep.
Yeah, there are some really wonderful books out there. And like we touched on earlier, finding that community and really like kind of just immersing yourself in this
Mm.
topic where the people align with you in trying to be more anti-diet culture can be really empowering as well.
So big. That's another one of the tips on the little sheet for your community, is clean out your social feed, um,
Yes.
and just go through and do a big swipe. We actually do this with patients in sessions sometimes. It's like, okay, we're doing a clean out. And
Yep.
then we start to load in positive social media feeds because social media, there's so much research out there showing that it can be seriously harmful to mental health.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And there are some wonderful creators out there who are incredibly transparent about their journey and who are very supportive when it comes to being more anti-diet culture and making peace with food. Yeah, if you can find them, it is incredibly refreshing to actually open up your apps and to see that versus maybe some of
Yeah.
the other stuff that you're used to seeing.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Adrian. So let's switch gears and talk more about the dietitian side of things. How would someone know if they would benefit from working with a dietitian? Or what are some things that you think would be helpful?
Well, I think dietitians are amazing. I mean, have you met Ashley?
Yeah.
Uh,
Thanks.
and so I honestly think like if I could wave my magic dietitian wand, that I wish everybody in the US could see and worldwide could see a dietitian at least twice a year, like you see your dentist. So
Yeah.
just a yearly checkup, like that would be revolutionary. I think if you eat food, and even if you are not able to eat food by mouth, if you're getting food into your body through other forms for medical issues, you should see a dietitian. You didn't come
Yeah.
with an owner's manual. And so seeing like, are you actually nourishing your body the way you should? So honestly, I think every human should see a dietitian.
Yeah. I like that. Kind of having it something similar to a dentist where you go twice a year just to kind of get a
Yeah,
checkup, see how you're doing. Yeah.
yeah.
Ah, I love that. I think that's wonderful. Yeah. Well, so how does one find a dietitian? I mean, obviously people listening here, might know how to do that, but for most people, how do we even go about finding a dietitian?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways. You can definitely go to, so eatright.org is the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. They have where you can type in your zip code and find a registered dietitian. That's the one. Shameless plug, you can come to our company, use Nourish. But also looking for a dietitian, a registered dietitian. They're the ones that are going to go through school, went to training, and for your protection in your state has a license to practice. So licensure is for the public's protection, not for the protection of the provider. It's for the public's protection, so that the state has valid looked through their credentials, made sure they've had the education, make sure that they are able to practice, and if they do not do well as practicing, they get their license revoked.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there's a lot of it's not red tape, but there's a lot of things you have to go through to not just become a registered dietitian, but also to get licensed in your state and to
Mm-hmm.
keep that up and to
Yeah.
be in good standing with the
Yeah.
board and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's a good point. Does it matter if it's virtual or in person?
No, not at all. I'm a huge fan of virtual because it fits into your life. We
Mm,
are all busy little bees, and trying to drive somewhere in traffic, find an hour, and then also make it consistent. So nutrition isn't just about food, it's about behavior change. It's about your relationship with food. That takes time and consistency. You cannot do that in 3 visits, 3 hours.
yeah.
It is consistency. And so I truly believe, and that's our standard of care, is that, it's behavior changed. And so we like to see patients weekly for a while because I don't want you to diet. I don't want this to be a beginning, middle, and end, and you repeat. I want this to be a lifestyle for long term overall health and happiness. So to me, virtual makes it fit into your life.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah, that's a really good point. So, if someone is looking to work with a dietitian, especially in 2023, what are maybe some things to look for? Or are there any like red flags that you see? Maybe what can help for someone who is looking to work with a dietitian? What are some things that they should look for in working with one?
Yeah. Yeah. So again, look for that RD and registered dietitian, and LD or LDN. Different states have different licensure. So some like states do not have licensure, unfortunately. Look for somebody that has an experience in what you are needing help with. So I do not know much about plant-based nutrition. I know a lot about eating disorders. So I wouldn't be the best fit for somebody that's wanting to move to plant-based. That would be Ashley. And so I would say look for somebody that has your experience. Look to see also if it meets your financial, what you're needing. If you need to use your insurance, if you are able to do payment plans or packages, like whatever fits your budget. That's also really important because again, this is not 1 or 2 visits. This is going to be continuous for a good provider. Also, I think this is really funny. I was thinking about this question too, is dietitians were really good at being dietitians and being good healthcare providers and stewards of our patients. we are not that great at social media. So if you go and check out our social media or TikToks, like most dietitian social media pages are not the greatest. Ashley's is beautiful.
Thanks.
But like a lot of people in private practice are spending time with their patients and don't have maybe the time or the means to do all of those extra things. So
Yeah.
don't judge somebody by their lack of followers or lack of TikTok dances or whatever.
Yes. That's a really good point, actually, because it is hard to do both, especially if you're working full time in private practice. Like it can be really hard because you wear so many hats in what you're doing. So it can be
Yeah.
challenging. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a really good point. And I know we touched on this a little bit, Adrien, about the insurance piece, but and you had recommended like, making sure you call or kind of just seeing like what's covered and disease-wise, what's covered. Any other tips that you would give for someone who is wanting their visits to be covered by insurance?
I think doing your due diligence. So it does fall back on you as the customer to call your insurance plan and saying, I'm going to see this registered dietitian. This is their NPI, their National Provider Identification Number. This is why I'm going to go see them. So what's the diagnosis? Is it preventative? Is it for hypertension? And so then those are kind of the three things. So the dietitian's name, their NPI, the reason, and why. And you might have a copay. Also, know your insurance. Do you have a deductible? Do you have an HMO plan? Do you
Yeah.
have a PPO plan? Yeah, so those can all be really important things.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, that was all really, really helpful, Adrien. I appreciate you. I appreciate your passion. I appreciate you being anti-diet culture and so many things. So I was so excited to have you on just to talk more about that because I think we can't talk about it enough.
Seriously, I would just keep on chatting about it if
I
we had
know.
more time.
Yes, I agree. Well, so if someone wants to connect with you or Nourish, where is the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, so it's just usenourish.com and on all social medias, use Nourish. And then me, it's just Adrien Paczosa. And I'm sure you'll have all that in the show notes because my
Yep.
last name is hard to spell.
Yeah, yeah, we got you. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom and just everything. We really appreciate you.
Oh, Ashley, this was just too much fun.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for listening and tuning in today, and we will catch you next time. Thank you again for listening to today's show. If you're wanting to work with a dietitian, Adrien gave some great resources, which we included in the show notes below. If you're wanting to work with plant-centered nutrition with Katie or I, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can go to our website, which we've linked below. And on that website, there is a form that you can fill out to explain more about what it is that you're wanting to work on in 2023. And from there, once we receive that form that you complete, we will reach out to you to schedule an initial call just to hop on, get to know one another, and make sure that we are a great fit to work together. And of course, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out at my email address, which is listed below, or on Instagram at Plant Centered Nutrition. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, keep thriving.